And we're back. This week I have 3 comic picks for you. One is Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. 2 is the love of my life, Lois Lane. And the 3rd is, of course, the comic that everyone is talking about, House of X, that new X-Men run written by Jonathan Hickman. So without further ado, let's talk comics. Alright, the first comic we're going to talk about today is Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. I'm so excited to have this in my hands and to have read it because Steve Lieber did the art in here and it's so good. You guys remember Steve Lieber? He's one of the co-founders of Helioscope and we talked to him last week at, well, I put up a video last week that he was in from Portland IndieCon, which was at the end of June. Let's not relive that shame. Thank you. But Superman Pals Jimmy Olsen was everything that Steve said and more. It was so exciting. It was little vignettes about Jimmy Olsen, who's somebody I don't know a heck of a whole lot about, to be honest. And so it was really good to get to know him through these very funny and silly vignettes. This comic did not take itself too seriously. It even had an actual literal wink to the camera. I see you, Clark Kent. And it was so good and it was so lighthearted, and it got a little more serious toward the end there, but it never once looked at itself and was like, we need to be real serious, and I really appreciated that. And so if you're looking for a new comic that is both funny and fantastical and just very well drawn, do pick up Superman Pals Jimmy Olsen, and thanks so much to Steve Lieber for chatting with me about it like a month ago, but for you guys last week in that video. So let me know if you read it. You know how to get a hold of me, Twitter, Instagram. I want to talk to you about it. It was really good. And we'll be moving on to Lois Lane. Now, I've said it once before, I'll say it 1,000 times more. Lois Lane is one of the inspirations as to why I wanted to become a journalist. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's her Pulitzer Prizes. Maybe it's because she's married to Superman. Maybe it's because she's just lovely and I love her. Probably all of the things. And this comic was great. Am I thrilled at the idea of a man writing Lois Lane? Not particularly. However, I am more excited to see that it's Greg Rucka. And you remember Greg Rucka. He wrote Stumptown, which is set in Portland and has a kick-ass female protagonist. So that, to me, it was already a point for this comic. And then I read it, and it was great. I love to see the grittier side of Lois. I love to see the unpolished side, because for a long time in comics, she was just sort of like a witty one line dressed in like a smart pantsuit. And so I really love to see a more modern take on her. And we get to see her journalism career, and that is exciting too. We know her as the Pulitzer Prize winning Lois. We know her as the Pulitzer Prize winning Lois Lane, but this dives into a story that she's working on and the danger that it is putting her in the current political climate. And of course, that's very on the nose for a gal who does some investigative journalism on the side of her comic stuff. Or the comics on the side of the investigative journalism stuff, of course. But I love Lois Lane, and I really, really liked this comic. It didn't hinge upon her relationship with Clark. It mentioned it. They look like a very functional and lovely couple, and that's nice. But I love to see a female-fronted comic just being a female-fronted comic. And so I really appreciate that Rucka took it in that direction. And I'm really excited to read more of this. I really love Lois Lane. I don't know if I want her to be my mom or my best friend, or maybe both. Sorry, Mom. I think that as we move forward and we get to see what Lois Lane is doing in her journalism world, we'll learn more about her as a modern woman in this new comic. I'm just very excited for it. Again, if you read this comic, you know how to get a hold of me. I want to talk about Lois Lane basically at all times. My aspiration in life is to be part Lois Lane, part Peter Parker, minus the spiders. I loved this moment where she was talking about, basically she was caught on camera kissing Superman, and Clark is upset that nobody is calling out Superman but are calling her like a slut and stuff. And my girl, Lois Lane, says, of course they don't say anything to him. Him is a he. Yes, girl. Just cause.
No, but which actor?
Oh, which actor? Oh, I think Tom Holland's doing a really, really good job. Because Peter Parker is like a high school student.
Yeah.
And like, even back when Tobey Maguire was like trying to play a high school student, it was like one of those things where you could tell he's like not 15. But like Tom Holland, he's not 15, but he's very young.
Yeah.
And so.
And he does a really good job at like acting like he's.
Yeah, but it's just like in recent years where I've actually like sat down and like, oh, I really like this character. I'd like to read more about this character. And then you can like Google, you know, where should I start if I want to read about this portion of a character? And so I started, doing this, and I'm like still like a novice. Like I'm like an amateur comic book reader. Like almost every time I walk into a comic book store, there's some fat white guy that knows 10 times more about comics and really wants to tell me that he does.
Yeah.
Which is fine. But that's not the point of why I read comics. I read them because I like them. I'm not like trying to show off about them. Like, Okay, oh, I'm gonna maybe start a new, okay. And last but certainly not least is House of X. It's a brand new run of X-Men, some of the same X-Men that you love, and I was really, really excited to read it, and it did not let me down. It didn't really read like a comic book. It almost read like a world-building novel, which was so exciting with some weird sort of sci-fi specs in it almost. Just a couple of quick notes and first impressions. Xavier looks wild as hell, and Magneto is still daddy confirmed, and a lot of your favorite characters from the X-Men franchise are coming back. I was really excited to see Elixir. I know a lot of people don't care about Josh, but I think he's super cool, and so I'm excited to see where he's going. There's mention of Quentin Quire, the Cuckoos are there, and a lot of people that you've seen from a lot of sort of fractured storylines out there are really coming together, and I think that's super cool. However, there was no mention of my queen, Emma Frost. This comic picks up after the Genosha genocide. That is hard to say. This comic picks up after the Genosha genocide. Am I not gonna get it? This takes place after the Genosha genocide, where mutants have taken up Krakoa, which is a sort of mutant planet thing. And they're rebuilding their mutant populations and also creating their own culture. So it goes beyond them being in hiding and hiding their numbers. They're really flourishing here, and they're using the flowers that Krakoa provides them in order to be able to transport other places, and also they use these flowers to create medicines that the humans need, so they're creating their own economy, they have their own language. It's sort of building on this sort of idea that, of course, we saw in Genosha as well, this sort of mutant place where they can go and be safe and away from the humans. And the idea is that these medicines that they made with these flowers, they're trying to give them to the humans. In return, they want the humans to acknowledge that Krakoa exists, and it is this mutant-only place. And it seems like Xavier and Magneto are working together on this front, and like there's some sort of amnesty for mutants out in the world. We've seen Mystique and Sabretooth and Toad stealing things like they're not supposed to, but it seems super on brand for them. And as they're trying to return back to Krakoa, the Fantastic Four stop them, and Scott Summers appears out of nowhere. Y'all know how I feel about Scott Summers. I think he's a baby and I don't like him. But he appears out of nowhere, and they kind of talk about sort of this amnesty that they have and these steps for moving forward and how the mutants are going to interact with the humans and the human superheroes. And it's pretty interesting. This comic made me really want to know about what the politics look like inside Krakoa and what the economy looks like and how it's going to grow, and those are boring things to make somebody interested in, so I will give you that. But it does seem like things are getting kind of hairy, because Scott, my favorite X-Men, mentions to Reed and Sue about their son. It appears that their son is a mutant, and they maybe want him to come to Krakoa. So it seems like there are other mutants hiding out, and that they will want to bring them into Krakoa to create this mutant family. But even hairier, if you will, Sue and Reed's son appears to be an Omega level mutant, and the Omega level mutants get mentioned in this comic, and they mention people, you know, of course, like Legion, of course Jean Grey, who's here as Ms. Marvel, Quentin Quire, again, no mention of Emma Frost, I'm waiting. But we also don't hear about characters like, you know, the Magnet fam. We don't see Polaris or Scarlet Witch or Quicksilver, and I only mention that because, you know, their dad's there. So we'll see if we get characters like that as well. I'm really excited to see who Hickman brings in from the expansive X-Men world and who he decides to highlight, because it's really exciting to see some of your favorite X-Men that you haven't heard from in a while, come back and do really cool things. And I'm really interested to know whether or not Xavier and Magneto are actually working together, because it doesn't seem like there's any real punishment for mutants who act out. Like Mystique and Toad were able to go back into Krakoa. That doesn't mean that there's not some sort of repercussion for them within their new culture, but to the outside world, it appears that all mutants are allowed in. And at the end of this comic, Magneto, Eric Lenser, just says a really Magneto thing. He wants the humans to know that they have new gods. So is Xavier on board? Will I ever see Emma Frost? I can't wait for the new comics to come out to find out. I am so excited about this. I'm a huge X-Men fan, I have mentioned that before, and this comic is really unique, not only in the way that it was set up like a weird world-building sci-fi novel like I mentioned before, but also because you're getting House of X coming out concurrently with Power of 10, which looks like Power of X, of course. And there's a little bit of a glossary at the back of the book that tells you when each book comes out and in what order you should read them, because these two series cross over and are important to one another. So that's also a sort of really cool and unique aspect of it. As a friend from the News Nerd channel told me, save your money, because they're coming out every week. We're brace yourselves. And since they're coming out every week, you can have them put in your pull box at Floating World Comics, located at 400 Northwest Cooch Street. I love Floating World Comics. That's my home-based comic book store. I go there almost every week, and everybody who works there is so nice and so helpful, and they help me find comics that I should be reading, but I'm not for some reason, and they can help you as well. Tell them that I sent you. Tell them I said hello. And that's all I have for you this week. I read 3 really self-indulgent fun comics for me, and I'm not sorry about it, but I do want to talk to you about it. So if you can find me on social media, here's my Instagram, here's my Twitter. I love to talk about nerd stuff, and also I post photos of my dog pretty regularly, and he's pretty cute, so it's like definitely worth following me. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that KGW News, the news agency that I work for, got a new digital app. And if you're an Apple user, you have to delete your old app and download a new one. If you're an Android user, you just update your old one. And you can sign up for comics alerts and get my comic news straight to your phone whenever I get around to writing it or recording it. I don't know. But it's really exciting. There are 1,400 people who want to hear about comic news. Will you make it 1,401? Because I would really like that. That's it. That's the pitch. That's all I got. So thanks for joining me. I will see you next week, same-ish time, same place. And this has been KGW's Comic Pick of the Week.